They say the best revenge is living well, but I'll let you in on a little secret. The real best revenge is sitting across the dinner table from your enemies and letting them think they've already won. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. The thing about being rich is that nobody believes you when you look poor. I mean that literally. I drive a 2012 Ford F-150 with a dent in the tailgate that I've been meaning to fix for 2 years. I wear a Timex watch, not ironically, not as some millionaire quirk. I just like it. It tells time. It doesn't need charging. What more do you want from a watch? My name is Bryce Coleman, and for the last 28 years, I have owned Coleman Industries, a manufacturing and logistics company that quietly sits in the top tier of its sector. We move product across 12 states. We employ just over 200 people. Last fiscal year, we cleared $15 million that would make your coffee go cold if I told you the exact profit margins. But walk up to me on a Wednesday morning outside my house in Allentown, Pennsylvania, watering my tomatoes in work boots and a flannel shirt, and you'd offer me a job application, not a boardroom seat. That's exactly how I like it. At 58 years old, I've learned a few things about people. Most importantly, I've learned that the worst betrayals come from the people who sit at your dinner table and call you family. Now, my daughter Shelby, God bless her, did not inherit my love of invisibility. She's sharp. She's beautiful. She's got her mother's laugh and unfortunately her mother's taste for ambitious men. When she brought Preston Pierce home for the first time 2 Thanksgivings ago, I shook his hand, looked him in the eye and thought, this man has never been told no in his entire life. You can always tell there's a particular shine to people like that, like the world has been buffing them their whole lives. Preston wasn't a bad person. I want to be clear about that. At least that's what I kept telling myself. He was smart, well-dressed, confident in a way that filled rooms. When I quietly put him through our internal vetting process, yes, I vetted my daughter's boyfriend. I'm not apologetic about it. His numbers were solid. His instincts were sharp. So when Shelby told me she was serious about him, I did something I'd never done for any hire in 28 years. I promoted from emotion. I made Preston Pierce the CEO of Coleman Industries. He had no idea who he was really working for. As far as Preston knew, he had been headhunted by a prestigious firm, interviewed by a panel of executives, and earned the position on pure merit, which, to be fair, he mostly had. I just greased the door a little. Shelby knew, of course. She thought it was equal parts sweet and insane. Dad, she said the night I told her, sitting at my kitchen counter with a mug of chamomile tea, you do understand that this is the plot of a soap opera. I prefer to think of it as strategic family planning, I told her. She gave me the look. You fathers out there know the look, the one that says I love you, and you are completely out of your mind. For 16 months, everything was fine. Preston ran the company well, better than I expected, which both pleased me and annoyed me in equal measure because it meant Shelby had better taste than I gave her credit for. And I wasn't ready to admit that yet. He'd instituted a new profit-sharing program that boosted morale, streamlined our Pennsylvania Dutch country supplier relationships, and even started sponsoring the Allentown Central Catholic football team. The boy had good instincts for community relations. Then, one Thursday evening in March, Preston called me. Not as a son-in-law, he called me the way he always did, warm, respectful, slightly performative in the way young executives are when they think they're talking to a simple older man. Bryce, he said, I want you to come to dinner, meet my parents properly. They're in town for the weekend. Honestly, they've been asking about you for a while. Something in my stomach shifted when he said that, not an alarm exactly. More like the feeling you get when a word sounds familiar but you can't quite place where you heard it. They've been asking about me, I said. Yeah, he said, and there was a half-beat pause that lasted just a little too long. You know how parents are, they want to know who their son married into. I almost said no, my gut was speaking pretty clearly. But there is a version of me, the version that spent 30 years building something from nothing. The version that's been tested and come out the other side, that doesn't run from gut feelings. He walks toward them slowly with his hands in his pockets. Sure, I said. Tell me where. The restaurant was called Meridians, the kind of place where the menu has no prices, and the waitstaff introduces themselves by first name and makes eye contact like they've been trained to. I wore my cleanest flannel on purpose. Preston met me at the door, freshly barbered, wearing a jacket that probably cost more than my first truck. He looked at my shirt and to his credit, to his genuine credit, he didn't flinch. You look great, he said. I look like a man who found parking, I replied. He laughed. I didn't. Inside, Donovan and Marlene Pierce were already seated. Now I need you to understand something about first impressions. In my experience, people who have done something wrong always overcorrect when they meet you. They're too warm, too welcoming. The smile arrives before the eyes do. Donovan Pierce stood up and shook my hand with both of his. The double-handed shake, which in my experience means either you're deeply sincere or you're deeply calculating, and said, "Bryce, we have heard so much about you. Please sit. Sit." Marlene touched my arm and said, I looked wonderfully comfortable, which is the expensive restaurant way of saying she'd clocked my flannel and filed it under not a threat. Good, we ordered. We made small talk. Preston talked about the company, carefully the way he always did around me, keeping details vague out of what he thought was professional courtesy. Donovan asked about my little property in Allentown, which Shelby had apparently mentioned. I told him I grew tomatoes and supported the local VFW when I could. He nodded the way people nod when they've stopped listening. You know, Donovan said, cutting into his prime rib, I did a little service myself. Army logistics, stationed in Fort Bragg for 3 years back in the 80s. Never saw combat, but I learned about moving materials efficiently. Important work, I said, which was true. My dad always said logistics wins wars more than bullets do. Smart man, Donovan replied. What did he do? Machinist at Bethlehem Steel for 34 years, taught me everything I know about manufacturing. I took a sip of water. Said the key to any operation is knowing where every part comes from and where it's going. Something flickered across Donovan's face when I said that. Just for a second. And then about 45 minutes in, right between the entrees and the moment I was starting to think maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, Donovan Pierce reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. He pulled out an envelope, cream-colored, thick, the kind of envelope that doesn't come from a drugstore. He placed it on the table in front of me, gently, deliberately, the way you place something when you want the other person to understand that what's inside is significant. He folded his hands. Marlene picked up her wine glass. Preston, and this is the part I keep coming back to. Preston looked down at his plate. Bryce, Donovan said, his voice dropping just enough to signal that we were no longer doing small talk. We've been wanting to sit down with you for a long time. There are some things about the past, about your history, that we think deserve a conversation. I looked at the envelope. I looked at Donovan. I looked at Preston, who was still studying his salmon like it owed him money. And I thought, there it is. 2 to 8 years of building, 28 years of silence, 28 years of believing that what happened with Wesley Grant stayed buried in the ground where I put it. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip. Donovan, I said, setting it down with a quiet click. Before I open that, I think you should know something about me. He smiled, patient, confident. The smile of a man holding what he believes are all the cards. I'm listening, he said. I leaned forward. I never sit down at a table I haven't already flipped. The envelope sat between us like a grenade with the pin already pulled, and nobody at that table, not Donovan, not Marlene, not even Preston, knew which one of us was already holding the pin. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor, subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. I did not open the envelope right away. That's important because the whole game, and make no mistake, this was absolutely a game, depended on who blinked first. Donovan Pierce had spent what I imagined was a considerable amount of time preparing for this moment. The restaurant, the timing, the cream-colored envelope, placed just so. This was choreography, and choreography only works when the other person follows the steps you laid out for them. I had no intention of dancing, so I picked up my fork, cut into my steak, chewed slowly, and let the silence sit on that table like a fifth guest nobody had invited. Marlene shifted in her seat. Donovan's patient smile developed a small crack in the left corner. Preston still hadn't looked up. Finally, after what I counted as a very satisfying 50 seconds, I set my fork down, wiped my mouth with the cloth napkin, and reached for the envelope. Inside were documents photocopied, but clean, organized with the kind of deliberate neatness that says a lawyer touched these. I didn't read them immediately. I didn't need to, because the moment my eyes landed on the name at the top of the first page, my entire chest went cold and completely calm at the exact same time. Wesley Grant. Let me tell you about Wesley Grant. In 1995, Wesley Grant and I were partners. We were both in our early 30s, broke in the specific way that only young men with enormous ambition and zero capital can be broke, and we had a plan to build something. A small manufacturing outfit in Allentown. Nothing glamorous, metal parts for industrial equipment, the kind of business that doesn't make headlines but makes the world run. For 3 years, we built it together, and for 3 years, I ignored every sign that Wesley was not the man I believed him to be. He was skimming, not dramatically, not all at once. The way termites work, quietly, consistently, until the structure is hollow, and you don't know it until you lean on the wrong wall. By 1998, Wesley had siphoned enough from our joint accounts to fund a separate operation, a competitor, built entirely on the back of clients he'd poached using our proprietary contacts and my relationships. We're talking about $150,000 over 18 months, which in 1998 money was enough to put a man out of business permanently. When I found out, I was not angry in the loud way. I went very, very quiet. I spent 8 months documenting everything, every transaction, every diverted contract, every forged signature, and when I had enough, when the file was thick enough to end him 15 different ways, I sat across from Wesley Grant in that same small Allentown office where we'd started, and I gave him a choice. Walk away, dissolve his competing firm, sign over his remaining stake, and disappear, or I take everything I have to the DA's office and he spends the next decade explaining himself to a jury. Wesley Grant chose to disappear. I rebuilt alone, and I swore I would never trust a partner again. What I did not know, what I had no possible way of knowing, was that Wesley Grant had kept detailed records of his own version of events. What I also didn't know was that he had shared those records with his cousin, a man who had grown up hearing one side of a story from a broken man who never once admitted what he'd actually done. A man named Donovan Pierce. I looked up from the documents. Donovan was watching me with the focused intensity of a man who has waited a very long time for this exact moment. "Where did you get these?" I asked quietly. "Wesley kept records," Donovan said. "His own records, everything you did to him, Bryce. Every threat, every ultimatum, the way you forced him out of a company he helped build." I nodded slowly. "And you've been holding these for how long?" "Long enough," he said. "Wesley passed away 3 years ago. Lung cancer. He died with nothing. Bryce, nothing. Because of what you took from him." And there it was, the grief underneath the strategy. I want to be honest with you. I felt it. A small, quiet ache for the version of this story that was real to Donovan, because he genuinely believed it. "Donovan," I said carefully, "I'm sorry about Wesley. I don't want your condolences. I know. What do you want?" He leaned forward. "I want you to resign. Quietly. From whatever role you still play at Coleman Industries. I want a formal financial settlement. The number is in the envelope. Paid to my family as restitution for what Wesley lost. And I want it done before my son's name gets attached to whatever comes next." And that's when Preston finally looked up. I want to describe what I saw on Preston Pierce's face in that moment, because it matters enormously to everything that comes after. It was not the face of a conspirator. It was the face of a man who had just heard something he was not fully prepared to hear out loud. There was color draining from his jaw. His eyes moved from his father to me and back again, with the particular panic of someone who had been told it's just a dinner and was now realizing it was never just a dinner. "Dad," Preston started. Preston Donovan's voice was a closed door. Preston closed his mouth. I watched that exchange and filed it carefully. "How long have you known?" I asked Preston directly. He opened his mouth, closed it again, looked at his father. "Preston," I said, softer this time, "I'm asking you, not him." He exhaled, rubbed the back of his neck. I knew there was history between our families. Dad told me when Shelby and I got serious. He said there was a debt that needed settling, and that me being close to you was— He stopped himself. "Was what?" I said. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. Marlene chose this moment to place her hand over mine with a warmth so manufactured I nearly checked for a receipt. "Bryce, this doesn't have to be unpleasant," she said. "We're family now. This is about making things right." I looked at her hand on mine. I looked at her face. I looked at the smile that had been ready and waiting since before I walked through the door. "Marlene," I said pleasantly, "I need you to hear this next part very clearly, because here's the thing about a man who has been doing this for 30 years. You don't walk into a room like this empty-handed. Not when your gut spent the entire week before dinner whispering at you. Not when a name like Wesley Grant is still somewhere in your past." I had made some calls of my own. I placed my own envelope on the table, smaller, white, unremarkable looking. "Wesley's records are incomplete," I said, which makes sense because a man who is building a false narrative tends to only keep the pages that support his version. Donovan's eyes dropped to my envelope. "What I have here," I continued, "are the original bank records from our joint account between 1995 and 1998. The withdrawal patterns, the wire transfers to a shell company registered in Wesley's girlfriend's name. The correspondence including 5 emails in which Wesley explicitly discussed his plan to replicate our client list and launch a competing firm using our infrastructure. I also have a signed affidavit from a man named Fletcher Reed, Wesley's accountant at the time, who is 71 years old, perfectly healthy, and absolutely willing to testify to what he processed on Wesley's instructions." Donovan's face had changed. The patient confidence was gone. In its place was something raw, something that looked underneath the anger almost like grief. "You destroyed him," he said. His voice had lost its dinner party finish. "He destroyed himself," I said. "And then he told you a story that let him die feeling like a victim instead of what he actually was. You threatened him. You forced him. I gave him a choice," I said. "The same choice the law would have given him. except with considerably less public humiliation. What he did with that choice was entirely his own. Donovan stood up, not dramatically, just the slow rise of a man whose legs have made a decision before his brain caught up. "Sit down, Donovan," I said quietly, "please, because this conversation isn't finished, and the part that's left, the part that actually matters, is about your son." Preston looked up at me, and for the first time since I sat down, I saw something in his face that wasn't panic or performance or the rehearsed confidence of a man raised to expect the world to arrange itself around him. I saw something that looked remarkably like shame. "Preston," I said, "I need to tell you something. And I need you to listen to me the way you would listen if I were just Bryce, not your father-in-law, not some old man in a flannel shirt, just Bryce." He nodded. Barely, but he nodded. I leaned forward. "I know who you are. I've known since before you walked through my daughter's front door. And what I'm about to tell you is going to change every single thing you think you understand about your life for the last 16 months. The waiter appeared at the edge of the table. "Can I interest anyone in dessert?" he asked brightly. All four of us stared at him. He backed away slowly. Preston Pierce was about to find out that the quiet old man in the flannel shirt wasn't a guest in his world. He was the architect of it, and the blueprints were about to land on the table. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running, so thank you for real. I want to tell you something about the word reveal. People think a reveal is dramatic. They think it comes with raised voices and pointed fingers, and someone storming out of a room. They've watched too many movies. In my experience, the most devastating reveals happen in the quietest voices. The ones that don't need volume because the words themselves are heavy enough to pin a man to his chair without laying a single finger on him. I poured myself a glass of water, took a sip, set it down, and I began. "Preston," I said, "what do you know about how you got your job?" He straightened slightly. The CEO reflex, the automatic assembling of composure that I'd watched him deploy in boardrooms for over a year. "I was headhunted," he said. "Executive search firm. I interviewed with the board. It was a competitive process. It was, I agreed, completely legitimate. Your numbers were strong. Your instincts were good. I want you to hold on to that part because it's true and it matters." "What do you mean hold on to that part?" "I mean, I said slowly that the search firm that headhunted you was contracted by me. The board you interviewed with reports to me. The position you have held for the last 16 months, the one with the corner office on the 12th floor, and the car allowance and the salary that I know because I approved it, exists inside a company that I own entirely, have owned for 28 years. The frown deepened, then stopped. Then his face did something I can only describe as a slow system shutdown, like a computer that has been handed information that does not compute and simply stops processing. He started Bryce Coleman. I said founder and sole owner of Coleman Industries. I kept Wesley's original stake in the name because I built this company on the lesson he taught me, and I never wanted to forget it. You have been running my company, Preston, reporting to my executives, signing off on my contracts, sitting in a chair that I placed you in. Absolute silence. Donovan had sat back down at some point during this. I hadn't noticed when. He looked like a man watching a building he'd spent years constructing quietly fold in on itself floor by floor. "Why?" Preston said. It came out younger than he intended, stripped of the boardroom finish, just a man asking a genuine question. "Why would you do that?" Marlene made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a scoff. So this was all some kind of test. "No," I said, turning to her with a patience I want you to understand was completely genuine. This was me being a father. There's a difference. I gave Preston a moment because what I just handed him was a lot of weight. And I'm not a cruel man. I wanted him to find his footing before the next part because the next part was going to require him to make a decision. And decisions made in free fall are rarely the ones people stand behind later. He ran both hands through his hair, exhaled through his nose, looked at the tablecloth for a long moment. Then he looked at his father, and I watched something shift in Preston Pierce's eyes that I had not anticipated. It wasn't confusion anymore. It wasn't shame exactly. It was something colder and more clarifying. "How long?" he said to Donovan. Quiet, direct. Donovan said nothing, Dad. Preston's voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. "How long have you known who Bryce was?" Donovan straightened his cufflinks, a delay tactic so transparent it was almost sad. "I began to suspect when you told me the company name, Coleman Industries. Wesley mentioned Coleman to me years ago. I did some research. When I told you the company name, Preston repeated slowly, meaning before Shelby and I got engaged. I was protecting our family. You positioned me," Preston said. The words came out flat and precise, like he was reading from a document. "You found out who I was working for, and you saw an opportunity. You let me fall in love with Shelby. You encouraged it because you thought I was your way in. Marlene reached for her son's hand. Sweetheart, Wesley deserved. Don't. Preston pulled his hand back. Don't bring up Wesley right now. I stayed very still because what was happening across that table had nothing to do with me anymore and everything to do with a young man seeing his father clearly, maybe for the first time. And the right thing to do in that moment was absolutely nothing. After a long moment, Preston turned back to me. His face was composed now, deliberate. I recognized it. It was the face he wore walking into difficult board meetings. It was, I realized with a quiet pride I kept entirely to myself. The face of a CEO. I owe you an apology, he said. You don't? I said. You didn't know. I knew enough to feel something was wrong about tonight and I came anyway, he said. That's not who I want to be. I looked at him for a long moment. No, I said, it isn't. And the fact that you know that is exactly why you still have a job Monday morning. Something moved across his face, relief trying to be dignified about it. As for you, I said, turning to Donovan, those documents you brought tonight are incomplete, misleading, and in the context of what I've presented alongside them, entirely harmless to me. I'm not going to pursue anything legal against you, I continued. Not because I couldn't, but because Wesley was your cousin, and grief makes people do things that the undamaged version of themselves never would. I leaned forward. Preston is the CEO of my company. Shelby is my daughter, and as of her 28th birthday last month, a majority shareholder in that same company. Your son married into something you spent years trying to take a piece of, and the only reason any of that remains available to him is because he just proved to me that he is not you. Donovan and Marlene Pierce left quietly. Preston and I ordered dessert, real chocolate cake and real coffee. Monday morning I told him we're having a proper conversation about how we move forward. No more flannel shirt mystery. He laughed. You're really not going to stop wearing the flannel, are you? The flannel is non-negotiable, I said. I drove home thinking about what it means to build something worth protecting. Some men build empires to prove something. I built mine to protect something. There's a difference, and tonight finally everyone understood it. When you spend decades preparing for war, peace becomes a choice you get to make, not a mercy you have to beg for. The strongest man in the room isn't the one who can destroy his enemies. It's the one who can afford to let them keep their dignity while they walk away.